Welcome. My name is Mike Webster. I'll be moderating a session today on encouraging more accountability by water utilities to their users. And I have with me today two experts in the field from the bank. The first is Maker van Ginnigan from the Water Anchor. Maker is a co-author of a report on this subject. And we also have Glenn Pierce-Oros from the Water and Sanitation Program in South Asia. And Glenn also has the chair of the Urban Global Practice Team in the Water and Sanitation Program. As a brief background to the study, we talk about the short and long road to accountability. In the long route, users raise their concerns about services with political representatives who then address them with the utility. However, in this situation, utilities rely on communication from political channels rather than communication from their users to assess whether their performance is adequate. The long route communication is cumbersome and allows other interests, sometimes corrupt interests, to intervene, and running the risks that the concerns of the poor and the less vocal users in particular might be lost. This risk highlights the need for a more direct mechanism of engagement and accountability. In other words, for a short route of accountability in which citizens exert directly client power on utilities without going through the state as an intermediary. From your research, can you give us some examples of the tools of accountability that utilities can use?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think this short route of accountability has become much more important in the past few years, and there's basically four major categories of tools that we looked at. The first category of tools that we looked at is information tools, which are basically one-way tools in which the utility provides information to their users through things as bill stuffers, internet websites, etc. Utilities do provide information, but in these kind of tools, users can't talk back. If you have tools where users can talk back, where there's a two-way communication stream, these are consultation tools, and these include things as surveys and report cards, public hearings, but they're not binding. The results, the opinions that consumers give are the utility is free to take or leave them. In a step further, and these are often more formal tools, there's actually participation in decision making in which consumers have a say and the utility has to listen to them. This can, for instance, be a consumer representative on the board of a utility or a binding consumer board which actually has something to say about tariffs or other issues. A last category of tools are redress and recourse tools, which are complaint mechanisms. Very often they're administered by the utility itself, a complaint department, or they can be administered by others. Regulators often have complaint systems either as a first call or as a call of a point for calling once the utility doesn't listen to complaints. But also NGO or the media can implement those tools. So we're talking about a whole range of tools here, which are from very simple things to quite elaborate things such as participatory budgeting or decision-making structures.
Very interesting, but one problem we have in the countries in which we all work is that often utilities don't know who their customers actually are, let alone what they want. Glenn, in your work in South Asia and elsewhere, do you know how utilities can tell what their customers want?
It's interesting because there's certainly many different tools that are available, not only to get household complaints, but also groups of customers, groups of consumers. It could be advisory committees, could be different customer response periods for inputs. But one of the more interesting instruments that we're starting to see take hold is the idea of doing some sort of customer survey, customer satisfaction survey. What comes to mind are the surveys that have taken place in Bangalore, in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, and more recently now in Rajshahi City Corporation, a medium-sized but progressive city in Bangladesh, whereby the exercise is focused on how do we get the customer base to provide input into the type of service that's being provided, which is very different than the individual household complaint that either there's no water pressure or there's a leak for that particular household. One caveat that we're seeing, though, is how to really make this a much more systematic exercise in terms of the customer surveys, which really speaks to the capacity not only of the utility, but also speaks to the importance of really branching out and what are some other local stakeholders that can participate in applying the customer instrument, the survey instrument to the customers, which requires not only capacity to design the instrument, apply the instrument, but also analyze it, and finally close the loop. How do you close the loop in terms of communications with your customers, with the conclusions or the analysis that you get out of these surveys? So those are outstanding challenges, I would submit. How do you close the loop in terms of communicating the results of these surveys back to your customers?
That's also why if you repeat these surveys, you can also see trend lines, and you close this loop, you can actually see has something happened with the last survey. And you see in a lot of countries that surveys are one-off exercise. So how do you close the loop and also keep implementing them regularly every year? Or you can do a smaller survey every few months, so that you really get a whole circle of communication between utilities and their users.
One issue that I noticed from reading the study is that often these accountability tools are done in isolation with the support of donors or with NGOs, but not fully integrated into the utility operations. And often these surveys these tools can be expensive. Do you have some recommendations for how these tools can be integrated into the utility operations to make them more affordable and sustainable?
I think one of the keys to this type of responsiveness that utilities need to keep in mind is precisely how do you maintain the credibility in terms of service provision to your customers, and how fragile that credibility is. That goes directly to this idea of how does it become an integrated part of your business. And I'll give you two examples. One being what happened in Delhi with the Delhi Jal Board, which instituted or was able to design the customer complaint mechanisms, but which were so cumbersome, became too onerous for customers, thereby providing a disincentive for customers to actually use those mechanisms that were put in place. And costs were quite high to be able to access or to be able to navigate that process. So that hits your credibility immediately. The other point, or the other example, being these hotlines, which are more easily installed and more difficult to be effective in their use. You set up a backroom operation in terms of collecting complaints, but unless it's connected to your front end operational units, then you're going to risk the credibility of receiving complaints without the ability of actually acting on them. Bangkok's Metropolitan Waterworks Authority has actually done quite a good job of integrating both backroom and front end. And so there's a very good example for our region in South Asia, in Thailand, of how to do it well. But again, I think the flag to be raised here is many senior managers that we come across are often very quickly taken by this idea of having a call center, of almost romanticizing the ease with which you can receive a call and then fix the problem. And it just doesn't work that way unless you think through the coordination and the integration between, again, your back room and your front end.
Yeah.